Hello, my name is Susan Whitkin. I am the chair of the Education Subcommittee of the New York State Bar Association's Committee on Animals and the Law. And on behalf of our committee, I would like to welcome you today to our podcast interview with Libby Post. Libby is the executive director of the New York State Animal Protection Federation, the voice of the state's humane societies, SPCAs, animal shelters, rescues, and animal welfare organizations. Its many members include municipal and not-for-profit animal shelters, as well as larger organizations such as the ASPCA and the Humane Society of the United States. In 2017, Libby successfully lobbied to have $5 million added to the state budget to create the Companion Animal Capital Fund, the first and only fund in the nation for capital projects at animal shelters. Since that time, the fund has been included in each budget except for the COVID budget of 2020 for a total state investment of $38 million. Libby is going to speak to us today and answer some questions about the Companion Animal Care Standards Act, which imposes requirements on not-for-profit shelters and rescues and goes into effect very soon on December 15th of next year, 2025. Mostly, though, we are here today to bring you important information about applying for a grant from the New York State Companion Animal Capital Projects Fund, or the fund as we'll probably call it. This grant can help organizations defray some of the costs of modifying or upgrading their facilities to comply with the new standards, although a shelter or rescue can apply for the grant, even if in full compliance. The grant deadline is very, very tight. Applications must be submitted by December 20th of this year, so less than a month. Before we start our interview, I want to also introduce my colleague, Nora Lawrence Schmidt, a fellow member of the Committee on Animals and the Law. Nora chairs its student writing subcommittee, but she also volunteers a huge amount of her time to work on major projects for the other subcommittees. In fact, Nora has been instrumental in putting this program together. And both of us want to send big shout outs to Nancy Boland and Joanne White, also member of COAL and members of the, in particular, the COAL projects, special project subcommittee, who have put in enormous effort in helping us organize this program and put together a lot of materials, forms and documents required to apply for a grant. And you can find these materials posted on the committee's website, together with some other guidance. We do urge you to consult with your organization's attorney or other advisors because today we remind you that we are not providing legal advice. So now let me turn this over to Nora. Thanks. She'll start us off.
Yeah, thanks so much, Susan. And Libby, thank you so much for being here. We're so excited that you were able to join us. So as Susan mentioned, we are here to talk primarily about the fund, but the fund can be used to offset costs that are associated with bringing shelters into compliance with the Companion Animal Care Standards Act. So before we talk about the fund, can you tell us a little bit more about that act? What are the major requirements? When does it come into effect? All these important elements.
Well, the Companion Animal Care Standards Act, first of all, is based on the Association of Shelter Veterinarian Standards from 2014, which means by the time the bill takes effect on December 15th, 2025, these standards have been around for 15 years. So they're not anything new. Shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. And we did this for a couple of reasons. One was when we were negotiating the puppy mill bill, the pet dealers were making noise about, well, we're overseen, but you're not, which isn't true. We are overseen. Those that are Article 7 shelters, municipal shelters, or nonprofit shelters with municipal contracts are inspected and overseen. But so we decided to do this on our own. This has been in the works since I began at the Fed in November of 2013. And when we put it all back together and proposed the bill. Amy Paulin carried it in the Assembly and Joe Adabo in the Senate. It's a 25-page bill, and it's a new chapter of law. It's chapter C under Article 26. And what it does is basically raise the standard of care at shelters and rescues across the state based on standards that have been around for now 14 years. Next year will be 15 years. And it covers everything from transport to vet care, to husbandry, to physical plant issues, to record keeping, training, all of that, those sort of things, the basic stuff that should be going on at animal shelters throughout the state. The other part of this is that everyone, whether you're a rescue, incorporated as a rescue, or incorporated as a humane society or an SPCA or whatever kind of shelter, everyone will be licensed as an animal shelter in the state of New York, and everyone will be inspected. All the bricks and mortar rescues will be inspected, and all the shelters are bricks and mortar. The foster-based programs will have to comply on a number of different levels, like record keeping, specifically having a contract with the foster so that the foster recognizes they don't own the animal and that they can't do the adoption. It has to go through the organization. There are things that people will, that we hope the fosters will uphold, like non-porous surfaces. So that's a big one. That's about disease control. So we know when you're a foster, especially, well, it doesn't matter, cats or dogs, they're going to hang out with the people they're fostering with. They're going to hang out on the couch. They might even sleep in their bed, whatever. But where they're fed, where for cats, where the litter box is, we expect that to be on non-porous surfaces to control disease. So a lot of this has to do with controlling disease. In the shelters, the air management part of the program is really about controlling disease, because you don't want bad air, what I call bad air, right, from an isolation unit to end up where the healthy animals are and infect them, because so many of these diseases are airborne. So all of this makes a lot of sense. I think some folks have gotten a little upset about it. The RFP for the Companion Animal Capital Fund is written to the same set of standards as the Companion Animal Care Standards Act. We did that on purpose. So yes, there is a little method to the madness here. And we have the Federation's Education Fund has raised close to $500,000 in grant funding to provide what I call low cost, no cost consulting to help organizations, whether or not they're a member of the Fed or not, to meet the standards. And we send in a consultant. We just ask the organization that is asking for this consulting services to pay reimbursable expenses like travel, food, and accommodations. And then the person will come in, they'll spend a day or 2 days, whatever they need to spend. And then the organization will get a detailed roadmap on what they need to do to meet the standards. So this was part of our sales job with the legislature. We told them that we were going to do this. They liked that whole concept of us providing this free consulting services, and it really has made a difference. And to date, we've worked with close to 70 organizations, and we just got another $100,000 from the ASPCA that brings them up to 200,000 in grant funding, and we'll be able to work with at least another 20 organizations across the state to help them meet the standards.
Libby, do you have a timeline here? I mean, I guess ASAP in terms of contacting your organization to get that assistance
Yeah,
straight away?
you need to go to nysapfedfund.org, right? Once you get to the site, it's all about the Care Standards Act. Read down, there's a link that you can click to go to the consulting page, and then there's a link there to sign up. And yes, as soon as you can. I mean, I also sit on the standards implementation team at Ag and Markets, at the Department of Ag and Markets. And we've made it clear that in these discussions, the first year of implementation of the bill is going to be a learning year, not just for Ag and Markets, right? But also for the shelters and the rescues. So no one's getting shut down in the first year, right?
Okay.
No one's getting dinged in the first year. There's not going to be any, there should not be any mass hysteria by
Panic,
anybody.
right.
Okay. I mean, I want to make that clear. And what Ag and Markets wants to see is progress. They know that there are smaller organizations,
Sure.
that can't make all these changes all at once. There's a reason why the effective date was 3 years out. It was signed into law December 15th, 2022. I said we needed at least 3 years as an effective date so people could do the work they needed to do to meet the standards. And so in the last 2 years, we've worked with 70 organizations. We're prepared to work with at least another 20 more, and so that they can meet the standards. But no one's going to get shut down the first year. Ag and Markets wants to see progress, and then they'll take it from there.
And Libby, just to confirm one thing you said, so folks do not necessarily have to be members of the Federation in order to take advantage of these consulting services.
Of the consulting services, right.
That's
Everything else that we do, I have a rule. I'll answer one question, and then after that, you have to join the Fed.
fair enough, fair enough. And we can talk a little bit more too at the end about how, some benefits of joining the Federation.
How to join, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so the capital fund, can you tell us a little bit more about that? Like how much is available, and I think you've addressed
Sure.
it, but just to clarify, who's eligible to apply for the fund?
Sure. So, the fund, as you said, was established in the 2017-18 budget. It's kind of hard to figure out. It was in the 2018. The RFP was in 2018 for $5 million.
That was
Over the course of the years, we've gotten the money back in when Cuomo resigned and Hochul became governor. We lobbied her to include it in the executive budget, which she has done the last 2 years, which are her 2 executive budgets, which means the money's there and it's going to stay there, right? Once it's in the executive budget, it's great. We've lobbied the legislature. I call it making good on your legacy allocation. The first year that she had the budget, they put in another $3 million. The second year, we were told matching money was going in, and sometimes this is what happens. It fell off the table, right? And I think it went to pay for the MTA. To be quite honest with you, they needed money so they swept some money out, and so fine. This year, the RFP that's out now is for $10.5 million. And the reason why it's not just the $5 million that she put in the budget is because we worked with DOB, the Executive Chamber, Ag and Markets, to change the enabling language of the fund going all the way back to the beginning to match what it is now, which meant the match went down to 10%. That meant that shelters and non-residence-based rescues were eligible for the money, okay? And it meant that it didn't matter how many municipal contracts you had to be able to get the money. And DOB, the Division of Budget, Executive Chamber, Ag and Markets, everybody was like, yes, let's do this, because there was money that was left over because there were, at the beginning and up until last year, there were folks that got the grant, but then couldn't make good on the grant because, as we all know, construction costs have gone through the roof and different things like that. And so there were some folks that couldn't use the grant, and that money just ended up hanging out there. And so we did this major change so that that money would become available, knowing that the Companion Animal Care Standards Act would put even more stress on the funding, that more people needed the funding. The RFP that was done in this past January, was oversubscribed, and not everybody got funding. And I expect the same thing to happen this year, where the grant that's due on the 20th of December will be oversubscribed, but there will be more money for to use it. Now, in terms of how it all works, you have this RFP, you have a process. We provide low-cost grant writers for our members. And, we tell people right off the bat, if you're interested in this, and I've been hawking this for a year, make sure you get set up in the state financial system. It used to be the Grants Gateway. in the middle of the RFP in January, they made the transition from the grants gateway to the state financial system, which caused a little bit of craziness for everybody. But it's really important that you're already set up in the state financial system, so you don't have to do that work on top of getting the grant done as well. Now, the grant covers direct costs related to construction, renovation, rehab, installation, acquisition, or expansion of buildings, equipment, and facilities necessary for the secure containment, health, and adequate care of sheltered dogs and cats. It covers labor performed by outside employees, labor performed by municipal employees if it's a municipal shelter, project oversight by shelter management. Eligible expenses are like the HVAC system, like I talked about before. The air handling is very important. Medical equipment or facilities used exclusively for sheltered dogs and cats. So there are shelters now that have their own operatories, their own vets, and the money they get from the fund has to be used for equipment that's for the sheltered dogs and cats that are there. Ineligible expenses are medical equipment or facilities used for community or outpatient services, and labor performed by shelter employees and that sort of stuff. Ineligible expenses are also the purchase of a land, architect or design fees, an archaeological study, right? So if you sometimes, when you do this, you need to have a seeker, a state environmental quality review done. This is not going to pay for it. Blacktopping a driveway or vehicles. And so, it's really about the capital projects that need to be done at shelters and to keep a good roof over the over the homeless companion animals while they're at the shelters. And I just came back from New Orleans from the Association of Animal Welfare Advancement Conference, where I spoke about this actually. And animal sheltering has changed quite a bit from when I was a kid to now. And, people recognize that we need to have good state-of-the-art facilities to care for these animals. No one is euthanizing for space anymore, although right now it's a little bit more difficult because of the overcrowding in the shelters. But we're really trying very hard to keep it that nobody's euthanizing for space. That's why foster programs are so important. And that shelters have the kind of facilities that they need to be able to grow and advance into the future. So one of the things is this. Sound dampening so that the cats don't hear the dogs barking. The dogs barking makes the cats very nervous and it degrades their quality of life. We're in the shelter. If you go down to some of the newer shelters now, you're in the cat room, you don't even hear the dogs because they're
Separated.
They're separated. Mohawk Hudson, the cats are in a totally different place than the dogs are. And you can't really hear the dogs unless you get close to that part of the shelter and you open the door, right? And so it's those sort of things. Having kennels for dogs that aren't just chain link, but are, glass enclosures with the bottom clouded in, so that the dogs don't see everybody that's walking past, so they're not, thinking, oh, somebody's coming to get me, So there's all these things that you can do to anticipate the needs of the animals in your care and to do right by them. And so that when they are adopted out, they're calm, they're going to be good animals at home.
Yeah. So, Libby, you mentioned the importance of being pre-qualified. And that's a process that I understand can actually take quite a bit of time. It can take not only just to get all the material that you need to do that, but then to have the state actually review your pre-qualification material can take like 5 to 10 days. Is that, I mean, or more, right? So folks need to do that real quick.
Right, they do. And it's the stuff, they want bylaws, they want minutes, they want your 990s, they want to make sure that you are who you are.
Right. Yeah.
Basically.
So in addition to being pre-qualified, what else do applicants need to do in order to even be ready to submit the application? So like, for example, Do they already need to have their vendors in place that they want to work with? Do they need, to have raised any funds? Do they need support from the local community? What are some things that they already need to have ready to go?
They need to have plans and budget. So when some of our members signed up for the Glowcrest grant writers, I pre-qualified them all, and I called them all and I said, do you have plans and do you have a budget? And when they said no, I said, then you're not ready and you can't apply, right? You need to have plans because part of the grant is showing them the plans, right? And you need to have the budget of how much it's going to cost. Now, the most you can get is $500,000. That's not going to pay for a whole new shelter. So you write the grant specifically to what you want it to pay for, HVAC and kennels, or non-porous surfaces and HVAC, or whatever it is that you want to do, and however much it's going to cost, right? And it's up to $500,000 is what you can get through this program. So you need to have all of that in place before you can move forward.
And what about the alongside funding that the shelter needs to provide? Isn't it's about 10% of the
10%.
capital cost? It's 10%.
You need to show you've got the money in the bank.
Okay, so they'll ask
Okay.
for a bank statement or something, or
I guess so, because I'm not part of the process of,
got it.
because it would be a conflict of interest for me to decide who's going to get the money.
Right.
But yes, I think so. You just need to have all your ducks in a row before you do this, and having the money in the bank, because the first year there was a situation with a shelter who was like, well, nobody told us, that we had to have money.
Yeah.
I'm like, read the RFP, and yeah, you do have to have the money. After that, they decided that we need to know that the money's in the bank, that they have the match,
Right,
and it's
makes sense.
10%.
Right.
So if you go for $500,000, it's $50,000.
Right,
It used to be 25 or 50 based on how many municipal contracts you had. And we got rid of all of that,
sure.
which was really great. And I have to
Great.
credit the folks and the Executive Chamber and DOB for recognizing, and Ag and Markets, but for recognizing that that was sort of onerous after a while. And it
Sure.
really disqualified smaller shelters from being able to apply, and smaller municipalities.
And can you share with us what is the anticipated timeline in terms of after you file your application? How long to approval?
Well,
Anticipated. I said it.
yeah, I mean, I think the grants are due on the 20th of December. I think folks will find out March or April. That timeline is part of the RFP, so you can look at the RFP and it's all detailed in there. But I think it was March or April that people would be told. And then we have to then go through the process of contracts, which is a whole nother ballgame. There's a lot of paperwork that you need to fill out. There's one person at Ag and Markets, Anna Cologne, who manages this program, and you need to keep up on the paperwork and everything you need to do. And one of the things we're looking at and we're putting together is a grants management program for our members, so that they have somebody else
Great.
to help
be
them
great.
who is experienced in this, because they get the money, but then it's like all this other stuff that you have to do. And unless you're experienced in dealing with the state and dealing with state grants, it can be very overwhelming and onerous.
Sure.
And so they have to do all of that stuff too. And then the contract process that goes through the Ag and Markets Contract Department or office. And then, and I keep going like this because they're right over there, from my office, and then the Office of the State Controller and the contract being approved. So it can take a while.
Okay.
You're not
And-
going to get the money immediately.
Yeah, and actually, just for our listeners, the RFP states that the tentative award date is January 31st, 2025.
Oh, that's what they said? Okay.
Yeah, that's what they said. And the tentative contract start date would be March 3rd, 2025. So,
Well, I
best
hope
laid
that,
plans, but
yeah, I hope that that's the case.
Yeah.
There's been issues in the past where things take a lot longer. And we just have to see. I mean, part of it's staffing, part of it's just the way it goes. You're dealing with the state. You're not
Right.
dealing with the deep state, but you're dealing with the state. And you're dealing with bureaucracy, and it's just the way it goes.
Sure, sure.
So I understand that the grant application, like you mentioned, is based off the Association of Shelter Veterinarian Standards. And we've talked about this a little bit. But can you just double click on that and kind of about how mostly how applicants should consider those standards when they write their response to the RFP? So
Right.
how do they factor those into their application?
You can't say, we're buying these kennels so we meet the standards. That doesn't fly. You have to say, we're buying these kennels that will do X, Y, and Z that will then uphold these parts of the standards. And just like, an academic paper, I guess, you have to do some citing of what part of the ASV guidelines this is going to uphold. So the grant reviewers expect to see that level of detail.
Okay, that's an important point.
Right. It's very important. The other thing that they expect to see, which is also very important, are local letters of support. That, I think it's worth 10 points in the grant, and everything has its own point system. But local letters of support from, if it's say it's an organization like, a local shelter, nonprofit shelter, they want to see a letter of support from the mayor, from town supervisor, from your state delegation, from your assemblyman and your senator. And it doesn't matter what party they're in when it comes to this. Okay. They want to see that the shelter itself or the non-residence based rescue has political support in the community, has the support of the local elected officials. I write letters for my members if they ask me to. But that's another important thing. And sometimes people just blow that part of it off, and you can't, because it really does have an impact on how well the entire grant will be scored. So I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, that was great. Now that's really important points. What about like a local chamber of commerce?
Yeah, that's fine.
Anything
Yes.
of that
Opinion leaders,
sort?
community leaders, town supervisor, the executive within the municipalities kind of thing.
Right.
So we're not talking about like volunteers for the shelters or local
No.
community, local community support from Joe's Pizza or,
No. Chamber of Commerce, yes. You know, this is a little bit of a stretch, but school board president, if the shelter does humane education in the schools, that would be great, right? So think about who the opinion leaders and the community leaders are in your community, whose names mean something to other people and who will have an impact. So, a lot of times these shelters, they get this money and they also do a capital campaign because they need to do more than just the $500,000. And when you do a capital campaign, you go after community leaders. So think of it in those terms as well. And I can say that this money, for whatever reason, I mean, I know that there's, always a raised eyebrow when, oh, we got this state funding, blah, blah, blah. But this money has been seen as sort of a stamp of approval that has helped jumpstart capital campaigns.
I can see that. I could totally see that.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
Susquehanna in Cooperstown, they got $500,000 the first grant round, and it kickstarted a $5 million capital campaign. And they built a beautiful state-of-the-art building that's been open for 2 or 3 years. Same thing happened for the Westchester SPCA, right? And I've been to both, and and that does happen. This is sort of this stamp of approval, and part of it is, as I've said a number of times, puppies and kittens are the last bastion of nonpartisanship, right? I used to say
True.
puppies, kittens, and libraries, but not so much anymore. But puppies and
Right.
kittens are, everybody, it doesn't matter what party you're in, right? People love their animals. And so I can tell you that I've been told many, many times that the legislature, the elected officials, they all love this money because it's feel
Great.
good money in a sense, but they also know it's going to a good organization that's serving the community and taking care of the homeless companion animals that need to be taken care of until they get adopted.
Right. So I think we've covered a lot of the questions, that Nora and I were thinking to ask you. Do you have any words of wisdom for shelters that are listening? Like, what's they're overwhelmed, they're nervous, like, oh my gosh, we have to comply with all these standards in such a short time, and this grant, it's like, it's coming up. How can I do this? Do you have any special words of wisdom?
Well, before we get to the words of wisdom, I just do want to say that
Sure.
fosters, people who do the fostering, will not be inspected. Their records will be maintained by the shelter or the rescue that is a fostering organization. The only time ag and markets would end up in somebody's home is if there's a complaint.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it would be complaint based. And the fosters are not, the list of fosters aren't going to be public.
Like public.
No,
Right,
no, it's
right,
not public
right,
information. In 2017, we passed a bill called the Shelter Rescue Registration Act, um, just so we can find out who the rescues were in the state,
right,
because
right,
nobody knew, right?
right,
And one of the issues that came out was about, well, are they going to list? And the answer was no.
right.
And they're not doing it for this either.
For privacy concern.
Right. There are privacy concerns, and these people are doing good work out of the goodness of
Right.
their hearts, but they can't. If there's a complaint, then ag and markets will go in and take a look and see what's going on at that particular foster house. In terms of words of wisdom, don't let the fear undermine your resolve to do the work. I mean, you can't let it make you that you can't get anything done. It can't immobilize you. It can't, because then ultimately there will be a problem. So, and again, I say we've been doing, this bill was passed in 2022. People need to understand that this is going to happen. The other thing is this. In New York City, all these organizations that have never seen ag and markets because ACC has a
ACC,
contract
right.
for the city. um, um, all of the organizations in New York City who are bricks and mortar will be inspected by ag and markets. And I've been saying that constantly for the last 2 years to get people to take the consulting services. New York Community Trust has given us about $96,000 to provide it for organizations in New York City, Long Island, and Westchester. And I needed them to expand to Long Island and Westchester so I could spend the money because the New York City folks were not responding. And
Mm,
we've gotten a few, but they've got to get with the program here and understand that yes, indeedy, they're going to be inspected, and they're going to be expected to live up to the standards just like everybody else. And so that's one word of wisdom and a cautionary tale that needs to be told, that the folks in New York City need to understand that yes, indeed, they're going to be inspected as well, and they're going to be expected to live up to these standards.
So Libby, can you just tell us a little, and I know we're getting a little bit like going off script here, but I think this is really important. So what would an inspection look like? Very high level, because I want to be mindful of time, but, and also like what happens if an inspection shows deficiencies? Like, is the shelter going to get shut down? Like, or are they going to give you a list of things to work on? What's going to happen?
warning or yeah.
Yeah, they'll give you a list of things to work on. So what they're going to look for is when you go through the shelter standards bill, it's pretty well delineated. They're going to look, do you have policies and procedures? Do you have standard operating policies and procedures? And on the Ed Fund site, we've got a whole drop down with lots of examples. And the ASPCA, which is on our site, has a Word doc that organizations can use, brand to themselves, put their logo on it, and make the changes that they need to fit their standard operating procedures. But they need to have SOPs. They need to know exactly what they're doing. They want to look and see if the paperwork is being maintained. Are you maintaining a list of the trainings and what people are doing? Your record keeping. They need to keep records
Good
for
point.
3 years. Okay. And there are a plethora of shelter management cloud-based programs out there from Shelter Love to Pet Point, all kinds of, there's a bunch of them, right? And so they need to make sure that they are keeping their records in a way. Let me put it to you this way. Doing it on an Excel spreadsheet or 3x5 cards are not going to cut the mustard. Okay. They need to use a cloud-based program that really gives you the ability to track the animals, to say what the outcomes are, to track meds, to track all the various things that you need to track for an animal that's at the shelter or the rescue. So all of that needs to be done. They're going to look at the vet care. They're going to look to make sure that after the 5-day hold is over, if the animal is still there and it hasn't been reclaimed, that the animal is vaccinated. That they've been given the proper medical care that they might need. All of that sort of stuff is going to be looked at. Again, the first year is going to be learning for both ag and markets and the shelters and rescues. But after that, they will be said, this is what you need to do. And if the inspector comes back and nothing's been done, they'll be dinged. There will be civil fines. I mean, and that's the only way you can make people move to do the right thing. And so that's why we gave people 3 years in order to do the work they need to do to meet the standards. And people shouldn't see this as onerous or horrible, or we're putting such, restrictions on you. This is not restrictions. This is quality care.
Right. It's aimed at keeping the animals safe and healthy.
That's right. So that they can be adopted out.
Correct.
And that's the most important part.
So I definitely want to make sure we leave time to learn more about the Federation.
Okay.
Before we get to that question, can you just kind of final words on what can a shelter do or rescue do to make themselves stand out on the RFP? Other than having, all the material that they need, and is there anything that they can do to really knock it out of the park?
They need to write it to the standards. I mean, that's really important. And what I said before about the local letters of support is important, but it's really about recognizing that the standards are there and that you need to write the RFP to the standards, and not to say we're buying these kennels so that we meet the standards. That's not going to cut it. We're buying these kennels that are X, Y, and Z kennels, right? Whatever it is, whatever they buy. And okay, we're buying these because in the standards it says 1, 2, and 3, and we're going to be able to meet 1, 2, and 3 by using these kennels. That's the way it needs to be written, and it needs to be written by a grant writer. Okay, I don't write grants. I get other people to do it because I can write, but I don't write grants. I've never written grants. It's not my forte. And you have to write, outcome based, all of that sort of stuff that they are looking for in grants. And so, it's important for you to have a grant writer who understands the grant itself, understands or will educate themselves on the ASV standards and be able to meld the two together in the grant application.
Got it. Thank you so much. Susan, before we move to more info on the Federation, do you have any other questions for Libby? I mean, we could talk to you all day about this.
Yeah.
All day, right? Well, I mean, this is probably not a fair question. I'm sorry but can you point to any particular resources for grant writing? Because many of our, little shelters have no clue. They're like, I know I need a grant writer, but like, how do I get one? How much does it cost? Does your organization match people or steer them in that direction? Or how would they go about doing it?
Yeah, we provide low-cost grant writers for our members, and we're doing like
Okay.
about 13 this time around. I've I put out a call because some of the grant writers that were doing it previously couldn't do it anymore. And so I put out a call on Facebook and LinkedIn and other places, and I got a great response. And so
Oh,
now I'll
good.
have more grant writers for next year, for the next RFP. But really, if they're on LinkedIn, put it out on LinkedIn. The New York Conference, the New York Council of Nonprofits, which is based up here in Albany, they have they have resources that you can avail yourself of, and I would suggest that all shelters join NICOM because they provide things like low cost or reasonable D&O insurance and things like that. As well as they do camp finance, they do a lot of good work, and they can help not write the grants, but refer you to other grant writers. Talk to the organizations that have been successful, right? If you go to our website, the regular Fed website, nysapf.org, and click on Companion Animal Capital Fund, you'll see the organizations that got the grants. And I detail the ones who worked with our grant writers, but there were plenty that didn't. And so, reach out to them and
Reach
find
out
out
to them.
who their grant writer is, and just this is where, getting involved with the local chamber or getting involved with a local nonprofit group, or even a listserv kind of thing can be very, very helpful to find the grant writer that you'll need to do this.
Thank you. That's really important and very valuable information. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Yeah, so to close out, I mean, we know that the Federation helps members with low cost or no cost grant writing services. You've got educational resources. Anything else you'd like to tell us?
Well, just to be clear, the low cost, no cost is the consulting services for the Standards Act.
Got
Grant
it.
writers
Thank
are
you.
low cost. They're just low cost. They're not.
Got it.
Look, the Fed is a policy-driven organization. I do policy and build an organization based on member services. I'm not at a shelter. Um, uh, I've been the president of a shelter, but I don't work in a shelter. I never worked in a shelter, but I do policy and politics. And so we are policy driven. My board is fully supportive of that. So, and we have member benefits for our members like low cost chips and we can help getting insurance coverage and other kinds of things like that. But really, we're here to make sure that we passed good legislation, like we passed the bill working with the ASPCA and HSUS. The three of us work very, very closely together, which is why we get so much done. The puppy mill bill, which comes into effect on December 15th of this year. A bill to outlaw discrimination based on breed for homeowner insurance. And we're going to hopefully get the renter's insurance bill done this year. I passed a bill a few years ago that enables localities to pass a local bill so they only have to hold cats for 3 days and not 5. That's one of those things. We deal with I deal with residency requirements for peace officers who do humane law enforcement. Right now, the law says your humane law enforcement has to live in the county that your shelter is in if you do humane law enforcement. And we've gotten bills passed that enable people to hire from contiguous counties. And so it's things like that, but it's good policy. It's the budget. It's the money in the budget for the Companion Animal Capital Fund. And it's also stopping bad bills. There have been a plethora of bad bills really aimed at ACC in New York City, but done at the state level. A bill that would have mandated shelters to list their euthanasia schedule, which would have put a bullseye on the back of every single shelter worker in the state. And we got that. That's not going anywhere, and it's never going to go anywhere. So we stop bad bills as well as pass good bills on behalf of the animal sheltering world in the state of New York, and a growing number of rescues. We've had a number of rescues join in the last few years, and now we're getting a lot more municipalities joining because of the Standards Act. And I've been working with a number of municipalities. There are some, like 4 or 5 towns, are going to band together and build a shelter so that they can provide sheltering services. It's getting more and more difficult for nonprofit shelters to provide the sheltering services for municipalities because they're not being paid the cost of care. And so a number of nonprofit shelters have said, we're not doing this anymore. And so, which is totally within their rights not to have these contracts. They're lost leaders. They lose money on them. And so now a number of municipalities are coming together to do their own shelter, which I think is the right way to go. There will always be homeless companion animals in New York and the rest of the country. And, you know, municipal shelters are fine, as well as nonprofit shelters and the non-residence-based rescues. I just need to be clear that if a rescue is only foster-based and doesn't have bricks and mortar, like a building, they're not, where the adoptions take place, they're not eligible. And the buildings need to be owned by the not-for-profit. So if somebody comes to me, which people have, and said, oh, I have this rescue in my house, I have said to them, you either have to deed the house to the not-for-profit in order to get this money, or just realize you're not going to get it, because the state, like family daycare, the state's not going to pay to enhance somebody's house so that they can do family daycare. They're not going to pay for someone to do capital improvements in their house so that they can have a rescue or do fostering. It's just not going to happen.
And that leads me to a question. So if a bricks and mortar rescue or shelter doesn't own the building but rents it, what about that?
As long as there's a long-term lease, right, they can get the grant to make the capital improvements. But
Okay.
it's got to be a long-term lease. It can't be month to month. It can't be year to year. It's got to be
Right,
5
like 5 or 10 year.
10
Yeah.
year. Yeah, a long-term lease. And that would be good.
Well, that seems like a good place to wrap it up. Susan, do you have anything else that we'd like to say about the New York State Bar Association Committee on Animals and the Law?
Not particularly.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah.
I mean, I think I plugged us in the beginning, you know, when I opened my introduction. But we do have, I'll say that we do have many articles. We're geared primarily in our continuing education, in particular, we're geared primarily to other lawyers. Which is why we wanted to do this as a podcast, to get the word out to non-lawyers and provide, you know, a public service. But most of what we do, we comment on legislation, you know, support it. We, as Nora can speak to, law student writing competition. So it's more lawyer to lawyer based, but that doesn't mean that a non-lawyer should not at least look at our website for articles or for, you know, things that might, you know, help them address a question that they're facing.
Well, thank you so much, Libby. We are so grateful for your time and for all the information that you've shared with us. I think this is going to make a big difference and hopefully help a lot of folks.
Great. Well, it's my pleasure to be with you this afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. Bye-bye.